Welcome to Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica, where no topics are taboo or off limits. Join us as we let loose and discuss the real, raw feelings about parenting.
In each episode, we will bring you heartfelt discussions, real-life stories, and special guests that will both entertain you and encourage community so no one feels alone in their parenting journey.
Thanks so much for listening. Now let's start the show.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed. Today, we have Barry Sokoloff with us. He is a risk management expert, and I'm going to ask Carrie to introduce him.
Hi, Barry. Barry is a risk manager. As Jessica said, he began his career in 1994. Since then, he has focused on developing customized risk management solutions for both individuals and families who have a need and desire to protect their most valuable assets. Barry draws on his expertise and significant knowledge of the personal insurance market, as well as his financial advising background, to develop strategies to mitigate, reduce, or eliminate risk for his clients. Barry holds the Chartered Private Risk and Insurance Advisor certification and the Certified Personal Risk Manager certification. He manages the Southeast Regional Personal Risk Practice for USI Insurance Services, one of the largest privately owned national insurance brokerages in the United States. And Barry is also the parent of 2 young adult children. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you very much. That was a lot.
know.
I didn't realize it was that much.
I have to drink water right now.
Somebody should have told me 50 words or less. That would have been
But
helpful.
when you have a lot of credentials, we gotta put them out there so people know who we're talking to and why you're the expert.
Yes, an old guy in this business. Yes, there you go.
Barry, that is a very lengthy, impressive resume. But my first question is, explain to our listeners and to me what exactly risk management means and why do we need to know about it?
Sure. So I'll encapsulate it in a way of personal risk management because there's risk management in so many facets in business across the world. But specifically, personal risk management is, quite frankly, our ability to help individuals and their families either reduce any personal exposures, such as owning a home, driving a car, driving a motorcycle, owning a secondary home. So these are all those kinds of exposures. And my job is to provide solutions, quite frankly, that will help mitigate, reduce, or eliminate some of those exposures that we're all, quite frankly, in front of on a daily basis.
Okay, so you mentioned automobiles. And because this is a show for parents, let's talk about new drivers.
Sure.
When our kids start getting on the road, what is it we need to know? I mean, I have 3 drivers. My youngest just started. When do you put them on your insurance? What do we need to know about our new drivers getting behind the wheel?
Good question. So it's a long-winded question, very similar to that bio that you read earlier. But no, honestly, first of all, it comes down to what state you live in, quite frankly. So in some states like Texas, for some reason, they decided that 14 years of age was the ripe age for a 14-year-old to get behind of a wheel to get their permit. So
Holy cow.
in,
Wait,
yep,
is that all vehicles or
anybody that lives in the state of Texas, they're able to apply for a permit in the state of Texas at the age of 14.
Huh.
So really young to get behind the wheel of a car. So my first suggestion is figure out in your state, wherever you live, what that permit age is. Now, to dovetail it to the insurance policy, most insurance companies will actually mandate when a household member is added to the policy, and then they'll figure out whether or not they are licensed or not licensed, and they'll associate that license or non-license on the insurance policy for premium purposes. So very basic example in the state of Florida, which is where I sit, Most operators get a permit at the age of 15.
Sure.
Some, for other particular reasons, parents say, you know what, I'm going to pump the brakes on the 15 thing. I'll do the
Mhm.
16 thing. So comes down to the parents' decision, quite frankly, since they're only minors. So at age 15, that insurance company is going to recognize that you have a household member that's 15. And now the question or a little underwriting memo pops up with your agent or your broker, whoever you're working with, that says, you have a 15-year-old in your household. Have they gotten a permit? Or what's the plan of attack?
Hmm.
So it's really the insurance contract that you're signing up and stating that all the household members in the family have been listed on the policy. So, really important to follow the guidelines for the state and then recognize covertly, and I say covertly, don't get your children involved with conversations with insurance companies about whether or not they need to be added. You should proactively do that research.
So then I'm curious if for some reason it hasn't come up that your now 15-year-old driver with a permit has not been added to your insurance, and let's say they're in an accident while learning with you in the car, they're following all the rules, are they covered? Is your car covered? Is your How does that work?
Yeah, great question. So now it comes down to certain insurance companies' guidelines that say that any member of the household, and by the way, there's an application that you signed way back when you applied for your insurance, and it said, please list
Yep.
all household members 15 years of age or older, licensed or not. So now let's just assume that didn't happen. And you're like, hey, well, I signed that application like 48 years ago. I'm like a grown adult. I can't remember a thing. So now you have this 15-year-old and they've gotten behind the wheel of the car. Well, according to the contract that the insurance company has put into place, they may or may not be providing any coverage for that claim. So you got to be very careful, and
Hmm.
that's why you should be asking those questions. Now, there are some companies that'll say, hey, look, thank you for sharing that with us. We'll make a note. We don't have to list any 15-year-old on the policy. But that's the exception rather than the rule. So most insurance companies want to know who's getting behind the wheel of the
All
car.
right. So for parents, whether the insurance company reaches out or not, we should all proactively, when our child turns 15, add them to our policy just to cover
Yeah,
all
and
bases.
depending upon the
Right.
state, and depending
Right.
upon the
It could
state,
be
because
14.
be
Right.
mindful, honestly, I
No.
don't know exactly every law in every state of the country. I will say directionally that you'll probably see more 15 than 14. They're, I guess, a bunch of crazy nuts there in Texas, and they want the youngest kids behind the wheels of the car. Now, look, the problem, guys, is not just driving a car, but it's just driving in
Yeah.
general. So the opportunity of a friend that might be a little bit older has a license and says, don't worry about it. Get behind the wheel of the car. It's okay. Well, then we get into other contractual issues that are associated with the 16-year-old friend giving permission to the 14-year-old friend to get behind the wheel of the car. That's actually not permissible in an insurance contract, and no coverage will be provided because you, the parents, didn't give that authorization because they're the policy holders. The child is just the child and just the driver. So you got
I
to be
feel
very
like
careful.
I feel like also in Florida, there's a law that says how old your accompanying driver must be, because I
Yep,
remember when my 15-year-old was learning, my 19-year-old wanted to take him out, and he's not allowed. I feel like the age was 21 that they
sure.
have to
I
be
think
able
you're
to.
spot on, Jessica. And every state will probably have some procedure in there. So now that's more of a criminal type of a conversation rather than what we care most about, because it's really hard to undo a civil issue. So if there's litigation coming from a really bad accident that is seven figures,
Mm,
because that happens,
sure.
now you have the potential of the claim being denied because they voided the contract that was provided. So I like to be less concerned about, look, maybe the person got a ticket, or they said, hey, you know what, you can't drive for the next 6 months. You should have never loaned that car out.
Right.
Okay. Right. I'm a bad minor child. But the real problem, honestly, if you're a parent, is you have to be concerned with the civil
Right.
ramifications that are associated with operating a really, really
Dangerous vehicle.
dangerous
Yeah.
asset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So less about that. And look, the question is so perfect because we field questions so much about premium dollars, which I have a hard time quantifying, like dollars. Okay, I have to add the vehicle onto the policy, or I have to have in this case, a driver added because they're 15 or 16 years old. Well, that's going to cost $1,000. Well, I'm not sure how you can properly quantify $1,000 as opposed to potentially a 6 or 7 figure lawsuit. I don't think there's any comparison there. So my suggestion is understand what the agreement is that you sign with your insurance carrier, understand what those state guidelines are, and do what's smart and proper for your family because you got to protect
Right.
the family here.
Bottom line.
So then at what point do you recommend, and what would the conversation look like when you're ready to sit down with your child about what it really means to get behind the wheel of a vehicle and the ramifications that can be had?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a really old guy right now. So I'm going to
Well, wait,
say,
I want to
look,
just state though that if you're talking about you're the really old guy, remember I'm older than you.
this is true. This is
So,
true. There's a lot of people that are older
so,
than me.
I'm
I'm
the
not gonna lie.
baby on the
yeah.
podcast.
So,
Maybe the experience I'm old.
okay,
How's that?
yes.
So I'll say that
You did have the driver first. You
what's
had
that?
the child teenage driver first. I'll give you that.
Yes, that's for sure. Look, the first thing you should be doing is recognizing what the next couple of years actually looks like. So instead of 5 4 3 2 1, I have a child in their license and let's get going. Do the research in advance. Speak to your broker and recognize, or your agent. If you don't have one and it's like one of those 1-800 phone numbers, speak to those folks. Hopefully you'll get the right information and they can at least suggest this is the alignment, right? And I would also suggest figuring out what type of training that you want to provide to your driver, or in this
In
case, the minor. And
in
I
terms of
say,
instruction, like driving
sure.
lessons, stuff
Sure.
like
Look, I can say that there are a lot of parents that are just absolutely panic stricken about getting in the car with their minor for whatever reason. So pass that torch on to a professional operator, a company, maybe the school, and it depending upon the timing really of the school. That's really what the challenge is. Some of them will only offer in the summertime, some there'll be a during the day class or an evening class. So do that homework really well in advance. My suggestion would be certainly at least 2 years in advance. So if the state, excuse me, is 15 years, I would at least start approaching it after they turn age 13,
Okay. Do
because they
kind.
can essentially start some of the training. And again, I don't want a parent to go to the child at age 13 or 14 to say, let's get you ready. You're almost there, right? It's too difficult
But
at that point.
meaning that
So when
the
you say
parent has the knowledge and doing the research about how they're, as
Yes,
a family, going to approach it when the child turns 15. Got it.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That would be the
Okay.
direction I would travel.
and something else I would suggest, I know when my kids became closer in age where they would be driving, especially with today's teens, I feel like if they're in the car, if you're driving them around, so many of them have their face in the phone. I
Mhm.
try to make them aware of their surroundings, even tell me what street is coming up, where are we? Can you direct me to, to whatever restaurant we're going to, or whatever it is, just to make them aware of their surroundings, because now they get in the car and they're starting to drive and they don't even know where they're going because their head's been down for so many years that you've been driving them around.
I feel like I have one of those children in my family. Even to this date, and it's many years since she's gotten a license. And look, uh,
Does she know where so she doesn't know where she's going?
it's difficult. You're absolutely right. It's a whole different responsibility to get behind a 5,000 pound vehicle that's traveling at 65, 70 miles an hour. It is a
Sure.
really big responsibility. So not just the training, but there are so many ways to help mitigate against this particular exposure. We're talking about automobile. And another good example would be most of every insurance provider out there offers some type of telematics component to their insurance program. And you're probably like, what is
Yeah.
this telematics?
Yeah.
My wife is going to kill me now. So the telematics is a device that helps to identify abnormalities within their driving behaviors. So, for instance, an abnormality would be someone that's operating the vehicle between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. That would be not normal for a typical adult, certainly not a
Okay.
child.
So
Um,
is telematics, is it a device that you attach to the car?
in some cases, it's a physical device that attaches to the data port underneath the dash of the driver's side.
Okay.
Oftentimes nowadays, it's an app.
Huh.
So with an app, the sensitivity is recognizing you're in a car, you're moving, but you may also not be the operator. So you got to just be very careful with that. The best part of telematics as a parent is a training tool because it'll recognize how fast they went, how many miles they drove. Like, for instance, I don't think most people want a brand new driver to be 3 or 4 counties away from their
Right.
primary home. I don't think that's probably good
Yeah.
practice. Time of the day, hard braking, right? So, for instance, you're doing 45 miles an hour and you see the red light 1,000 feet in front of you, and you decide, I don't really need to brake this far in advance. I'm just going to go really fast all the way to the red light and then brake hard, right? Well, the problem with that is you're going to lose the number of feet you need for asphalt, right, to avoid smashing the other side of the vehicle, right, and the other, right. So telematics is such a wonderful training tool for young operators. So every one of the large insurance providers across this country, every one of them has it. The innovator of the product was Progressive many,
Hmm.
many moons ago, but everybody has adopted. It's user based driving. And that's where the evolution of auto
And
insurance is
is
going.
the benefit of the telematics for the parent and child relationship to take a look at the driving? Or is it,
Absolutely. I think it's a
all
great
right,
opportunity,
what
Carrie.
about, does the insurance company see it? And does that have an impact on your rates and your policy and your ability
Perfect
to have
question.
insurance for that
Yep.
child?
So fortunately or unfortunately, every company has their own platform on how they operate telematics. I can give you a couple of examples where the company would incentivize the parent to sign up for telematics right off the bat. They may get a 10% discount on their auto insurance. And then they'll say, okay, for the next 4 months, we're going to gather all of this data and figure out what kind of discount that we can provide or what kind of surcharge because you're just a misfit behind the wheel. So that's a very real possibility. So if there's a discount, it may be another 5, 8, 10, 12, 15% on top of the premiums you're paying for that one vehicle. So it could be up and it could be down depending upon the behaviors. The good news is almost every one of the companies gives you an opportunity to opt
Okay.
out. So opting out means, hey, I've had it for 30 days. My kid is terrible. I need to send him back to
Okay.
school. Right? I cannot possibly have him driving this vehicle. This is ridiculous. I don't even know where he got these tendencies from. So you can opt out and say, you got to go back to school, right? Because this is terrible. This is not going to end well. So you can take them out and you can then re-opt back into the program, of course, in the future. So every company's got a opt-in and opt-out opportunity, but every single one of them will provide a discount. Some of them won't even provide a surcharge if they're bad operators. They just won't give you a
Okay.
discount.
Do they offer discounts for other devices like telematics? If it's not, because Life 360
Hmm.
has some of these features as well. Like for they show you the speed they're going, they show you if there's hard braking, they even show you telephone usage.
Yeah, great question. Most of the companies have their own proprietary system. Can you
Okay.
use additional systems? Well, honestly, I would say if the system you had in place was with your insurance provider for the first 4 months, we'll say, Could you engage Life 360 and say, let's get that enabled? Because fake it till you make it. Maybe that's what happened the first 4 months. Let's continue to gather that information for the driver, right? Or for the minor in this case, for maybe the next 8 months. And then you know what? After a year, I'll feel a little bit better because they may have logged a big whopping 400 hours behind the wheel. So I feel better. But again, a training tool. But there's a ton of other discounts, of course. The safetyness of the car, right? We buy cars like with 15 cameras and 14 airbags and anti-lock brakes and blind spot
Right.
monitor. Like it's like
We're in
we're
a
in this
bubble.
giant bubble. Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. There you go. So I would suggest, just a suggestion would be, find a vehicle that is providing all of the safety features that would be smart for a newer operator. And at least we're in 2024, we've had really smart cars doing a lot of great things for safety purposes for a long time now. So it doesn't have to be a brand new car
Right.
for that, right? For that matter.
Are there different rates for different cars
There are
based on
definitely
their
different
safety
rates.
features?
Absolutely. There are some insurance providers that charge an arm and a leg, literally. You'd have to, lose
A limb. Yeah.
an appendage here, just to get an operator and the car insured. Good example, we had a variety of different cars in our family, and namely some vehicles that are faster looking, and those cars are really expensive to insure.
Mm.
German-made automobiles, for the most part, the higher, more expensive German-made automobiles, very expensive. Um, you know, uh, the Toyotas, the Japanese vehicles, a little bit less expensive. So there's a variety of vehicles that will give you a good bang for the buck. And my recommendation is speak to the broker and say, look, I'm looking at 3 different cars.
Okay, that's a
And
great idea.
look, when money's no object, it doesn't really matter, of course, but you'll recognize that in most parts of this country, auto insurance is at epidemic levels with premiums we haven't seen in many, many years. And I mean, people paying 5 figures a year for auto insurance is just normal
Wow.
right now. I mean, it's a lot of money.
Why do you think that is? You
I know
betcha.
specifically why it is.
Okay, then
So,
tell us.
yeah, litigation is up in many parts of this country in a main way. Now, there's a lot of legislation across the country that helps to try to taper some of that litigation. But what we also have is cars that are really darn expensive to fix. So the
Mm,
cost of labor and the cost of parts, where there was a 5 mile an hour crash that damaged your headlight that was once $1,200, is now $3,800. So just start to do the math on the
yeah.
number of claims that happen. And vehicles are becoming more totaled
Yeah.
quicker than they're being repaired because in some cases parts aren't even being found. So we went through that whole stage with COVID where parts weren't being manufactured. Cars sat for months that weren't getting fixed. Finally, insurance company says we can't endure the cost of just storing these vehicles anymore. We're just going to total it out. Good luck. I hope you can find something. Those costs have really hit the insurance companies. And the biggest change, at least in the last couple of years, is people forgot how to drive. After COVID, people had no idea. There was this giant fog. People are driving and they have no idea where they're going. They have no idea how fast they were going. Claims were at an all-time high in the last couple of years. The good news is this year we're starting to see some pullback on rates. We're seeing small rate discounts being associated with renewals now. So, look, it's a cycle at 30 years because I'm that old guy. It goes up and it goes down. Hopefully it's going down while your kids are starting to drive, and hopefully
Well,
it's going, well, hopefully it's never going to go up, but the reality is it's going to go up. So when they get off the
Mhm.
payroll, right, or out of the nest or whatever term you want to use, it's really darn expensive for young adults to pay for auto insurance. And look, I want to make sure that the biggest takeaway is not the
Right.
premium, but is the liability that's associated with the family. And it's not even just the liability, it's also reputational. We had a client recently that I caught up with that was in a bad accident. It happens, bad accidents happen all the time. And somebody was really badly injured and they were succumbed to a wheelchair for the rest
Oh
of their
God.
life. It was
oh,
horrific. It wasn't good. But look, they're automobiles and they're heavy and they cause a lot of damage and it happened. He was ridiculed, he was spoken about. They even accosted the person that was driving the vehicle in his town. So on a reputational basis, the parents and the family didn't know what to do at this point because they thought it was intentional in some way, shape, or form. So, like the cost of an accident sometimes is just not my premium went up, but how
Right.
is it going to
Yeah.
affect the family and everything that the family has tried to
Right.
create over the course of decades? So, got to be very careful about how you go and just, eh, I'll say it like this: it's important that parents just consider doing everything they can to minimize the premiums, but maximize the opportunity to defend them in a legal
Okay.
action.
So when you say something like that, are you suggesting that parents get the maximum amount of coverage for their drivers?
They should get the best coverage they possibly can for the premium that's associated with that. Yes.
Okay.
And if that means taking higher deductibles and absorbing a little bit more on the lower scale claims, my kid backed up and hit that yellow pole. I know the yellow pole's always there. Okay, well, it's $1,200. Don't
Yeah.
file that claim because you know what's going to happen when you file that claim. I think
Right.
everybody that's listening to this is going to know what's going to happen. So you see a surcharge, you increase premium. So absorb those smaller incidences. Don't even think about filing a claim. And the other claims that people have a problem filing, and this is perfect for children, which is, Dad, I don't know what happened, but I, there's no gas in the car. I don't know. I don't know. The car just stalled, right? It just stalled. Well, don't call the insurance company for the roadside service. Get a roadside policy that's specific for roadside because those are claims that are associated with an auto insurance policy. That's a claim. Stay away from claims. So get a
Mhm.
AAA roadside policy or whatever roadside policy. There's a lot of institutions that offer roadside. So stay clear of that
Okay.
nonsense.
Those are good tips.
Yeah, good tips for sure.
Go ahead,
So,
Jess.
no, I was just going to say, so now your new driver is a little older and they want to take their car to college.
Okay.
Is there an advantage to having your child have their own insurance policy while they're at college? And is that even allowed? Because is it considered a permanent residence or a part-time residence? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So it should first start with, is the member of your household still a financial member of your household? Yeah, I know they went to college, right? You packed them all up and you went through the tiers and you brought them to the dorm and you dropped them off and they have their car and they're like, okay, they're adulting. They're not adulting. They're still associated with your financial household.
Yes.
And they're going to come home Thanksgiving and Christmas and the summer holidays and all this kind of jazz. So at this stage, whether you retitle a vehicle in the child's name, that is up to you. That's not going to dissolve the potential liability that's associated with the parents just because they're 18 or 19 and you retitled the vehicle and sent them packing to college.
Okay. So
So in terms of if they get into an accident while they're away, you it
Absolutely.
still falls under the
Absolutely.
liability of your household?
Yeah, because the challenge is as soon as parents want to do that and they want to retitle that vehicle and send them packing and get them on their way, they instinctively say, well, she's my child and I can't afford these liability limits. So instinctively, they'll lower the liability. The attorney understands that. So they're going to recognize where the deep pockets are. And the deep pockets are the parents. Kid's by himself. Now, if the kid is completely independent, like you've literally sent them away and they're no longer a part of your household, you've given them their own health insurance, like they're completely on their own. Absolutely. And I've had parents with that. They've signed documentation and literally at the age of 18, they've eliminated that person from their household.
can you change the
Hmm.
location of the car? Like, does that do any?
You can definitely change the
Okay.
location. Absolutely. I would say the majority of the clients that we work with are probably part of some suburb of some large city in most cases. We don't work in little small towns for the most part. But typically, those colleges, shockingly, like Indiana as an example, right? That would be a much smaller town. So going to more of a rural community. So, yes, most companies will recognize the zip code because that's all it is, a garaging zip code of where that vehicle is being kept, and there's going to be probably a reduction in
Okay.
premium. Now, there are some people that come from up north, right, and travel down to the University of Miami and realize, oh my God, This insurance is literally 3 times expensive as it was in
Right.
wherever. Yes, you're in Coral Gables, you're in a real big city now, so it's gonna be really expensive. So, yes, on a premium standpoint, you can definitely alter the garaging, that's what the insurance term is, garaging location of where the vehicle's kept on a nightly
Okay.
basis. Now, here's the small little hiccup in the equation. Depending upon where they're going in terms of what state and how many months they're going to be attending that school, and usually it's at least 90 days plus, it's usually a few months, that state may force the issue to re register and retitle that vehicle in that given state. And for those reasons, you may be forced to get an insurance policy in that state. Depends on the guidelines and the laws of that state. So it's hard for me to paint a broad paint stroke and say every state is going to be
Okay.
like that.
Sure, that makes
All
sense.
right. Is there anything else that parents should be aware of when their child goes with their car to college in terms of friends driving their car or being in the car with them, or fraternities making pledges, drive their kid, the cars around, shuttling, brothers in the house? Like, what things do parents need to consider before they say, yes, you can have your car at college?
That sounds almost as if you may have been in part of that in some way, shape, or form, Carrie, in your past life. I'm not, no guilt by association here, but it almost sounded like
No,
it
I
there for
work
a
with a
second.
lot of parents, so I'm going to say it's a
Okay.
summation of different
Okay.
situations.
So once again, the concept, I think the big takeaway is vehicles titled to mom and dad, or mom and dad and the child, variety of ways they could be. Right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind once again is liability exposure. And I'm the policy holder. My child, if he or she is going to school, or whatever child is going
Right.
to school, and they don't have the ability to provide permission to anyone to operate that vehicle. They're not the policy holder. So they got to be very careful on, yeah, my roommate says he's fine to drive. Look, don't get me wrong, if there's a significant
Mhm.
emergency, like, get in the car and
Right.
drive, right? But if it's, yeah, I do this all the time and I happen to drink a little bit too much, but my roommate, he or she's always ready to drive the car. Well, that should be communicated to the parents, making sure that somebody's received permission. Because under deposition, if they state that, who did you ask for permission to operate this vehicle? And I asked your son, for instance, and that's the deposition, you may have a big problem in a
Okay.
court because that policy contract is now
Okay.
voided. So,
What if you say
of
something like, before you go to school, just know you have my permission if other people need to drive your car in the case of an emergency, they have my permission. Only in the
that would be the perfect thing to say. But what's interesting about children is you give them that inch, right? You give them that inch and they're like, "Geez, that means everybody and every day is an
I had to go
emergency."
to Publix, it was an
I had no
emergency.
food.
Dad,
Yeah. I had no food.
I couldn't get Chipotle all day, and this is really important, right? So I can imagine anything, but they should look at that age in the game. You should be sitting down with them and talking to them, just like you should be sitting down with them and talking to them about what's associated with cyberbullying, with
Sure.
the applications, and just like you should sit down and talk to them about the fact that they're now in a school and mom and dad aren't actually going to get involved with that school because they can't, because they're over the age of 18. Look, just like you should tell every one of your parents that they should have a medical power of attorney for every single child that's age 18 or older, doesn't matter. I don't care if they're 30 years old. If they're alone, if they're single, they're alone in this world, and the only people that are going to make decisions for them are the hospitals or the doctors that are managing them. So, with a medical power of attorney, you will always stay in the loop in terms of what's going on with your children. That's really important. Again, doesn't matter their age, but certainly at the age of 18 or older, that's really important.
That was a great segue, Barry. Explain to our listeners what that means. What is a medical power of attorney for
Sure.
anyone over 18?
Sure. And in every state, it's different. So you can actually probably nowadays download something very like of kind and quality, right? From some website. I'm sure there's something trusts and estates or whatever that website is. But at the end of the day, because there's HIPAA laws that are in place that do not allow any communication between a adult, which is 18 years of age, with anyone else without that permission from that individual. So if the individual isn't in a position that they can speak, maybe they're now hooked up to a machine and they can't speak, you would want to be able to get involved right away with any of those decisions. So this paperwork, this document just says that I've expressly authorized this person, that person, this person, right, whoever that is, to be involved with any medical decisions if I am not capable of making
All
those
right.
decisions.
And the power of attorney or the medical, what's it called? Medical power of
Medical power of
attorney. Yeah.
attorney, yeah.
Is it enough for the parents or parent to have a signed notarized copy, or does the school also need to have a copy of said form?
I can't say I know the actual answer. I just kept it as a PDF, quite frankly. And, in the event of an
You
incident,
had it.
I would be able to either fax it, email to wherever it may be, because they may not be going to the school, right? They may be going to a
Right.
hospital or an urgent
Okay.
care center, or a variety of different things. But I would say having it and knowing where your child is probably helpful, and knowing who the roommates are, because that communication loop might help you exercise additional
Okay.
caution if something happened and you had that medical
Okay.
power of attorney. And by the way, not just for the children, right? But for parents listening, one parent should have, husband wife should have a medical power of attorney for
Each.
each of those individuals, right? Because
Mm,
you just don't
Right.
know. And again, the last person you'd want to make decisions is a medical facility or a
Okay.
doctor. You may have other wishes, and your spouse may not know that. So you should probably get together with that as well.
great advice. Talking about these college age children, what about in terms of where they're living? Should they have insurance, renter's insurance? Are they considered a renter if they're in a dorm versus a fraternity, sorority house,
Apartment.
or apartment?
Yes, depending upon where they live, you can do a couple of things with your own insurance program for liability. So we'll talk about the coverage side first, which is, in most cases, you can extend liability from your primary home insurance policy to another location, such as a dormitory, such as an apartment, such as a sorority house or fraternity house, whatever type of
Whatever
living
dwelling
facility
they're
it
going
is.
to habitate.
So you can extend liability there. So you can actually call your insurance provider and say, hey, listen, I want the liability that's on my policy extended to that location. And then, of course, if that family has an umbrella policy, which most families that are looking to avoid massive financial loss have, you want to make sure that location, that new location, is listed on the umbrella policy. Second part of that is do they need a renter's policy? It comes down to what you're suggesting that the exposure is. If it is, my child's going up with a lot of expensive stuff, and yes, they shopped at Lululemon for years and years, and now they've has this giant wardrobe of Lululemon, and it's thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. Yes, if they're going with an extreme amount of personal property that costs a lot, I would suggest a renter's insurance policy if they're in an apartment or a facility that requires a lease. If they're in a dorm, they can have dormitory insurance, which it also includes liability, but you might be grabbing it from your primary home insurance policy. And if you're not, that's fine. If your company says, hey, we don't do that extension thing, that's for other companies, not us. You can procure the liability that's associated with a dormitory policy or an apartment policy that could still dovetail to the parent's umbrella insurance and maybe be appropriate for the liability. The truth is, kids do dumb things. And
Mm.
a client of ours, we had a terrible dormitory fire that they caused. It was by accident, but they caused it. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars of smoke damage and water damage that was associated with the fire. And their liability, of course, stepped in and protected the family from that loss.
So
Bad
was
thing.
particular client sued by everyone in the dormitory or the college because they caused it, or
Well, the dormitory, the state, or in this case, it was the university, state university, stepped up and, of course, relocated the folks that needed to be relocated from the building.
okay,
They took care of that, right? So they culminated all these expenses while the dormitory needed to be remodeled. And yes, there was litigation that was delivered. Now, luckily, they
okay,
weren't sued by any of the other children that were in the
individually.
dormitory because they were made
Yeah.
whole, right? They got to where they needed to get to. It was a disruption. It was a disruption, I'm sure, for a couple of days, but everybody rebounded. And I think they got some pretty nice accommodations, quite frankly, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And without a dormitory policy and without the ability to extend liability, there wouldn't be any
Right.
insurance coverage.
Huh.
That's the challenge.
Wow.
And look, kids do dumb things. I know it's like that when they're 18, 19 years old, because what can go wrong when you send an 18-year-old to college for the first time away from their parents, right? Nothing can go wrong. One of the challenges is they often leave their doors open. I Maybe because they left their doors
In
open
the
at
room.
home, they leave their doors open at dormitories, and the brand new Apple laptop they just got right when they graduated from high school, they brought up and it just boop disappeared. Couple $1,000 gone. Well, some families can afford to replace it, but that's a
Yeah.
sting, right? That's a stinging
Sure.
conversation to have with your parents. Yeah, I know I'm here for 3 days and the laptop's gone. Yep. Yep. Bad conversation. You can do things proactively to make sure you put the right policies in place. Again, that is a claim waiting to happen. The mitigation, right? The risk management, Jessica, which you asked about at the beginning of
Yes.
the conversation, was what should we discuss and how should we discuss the important aspects of being away from a house? What would be a smart thing that we would deliver? And a smart thing would be, hey, listen, um, it's you and somebody else in your dorm. You got to be on the same page about making sure everything is locked up. Hey, here's another idea. They actually have these laptop secured storage things. Let's get one of those. Let's lock that up.
Right.
And if there's anything else that's valuable, let's see if we can get some kind of a
Safe.
portable safe or device or a box, safe box or whatever you want to call it, where we can put the really valuable. I don't think people are going to probably go in and steal underwear and t-shirts and shorts,
Yeah.
but
Watches.
I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
Lululemon, it's possible, right?
Watches.
Yeah,
A
and
watch.
yes, beautiful watches that are left alone. Thinking about those things, and I know they do this. What do they do? This thing called pre-gaming now. It's an interesting concept. Nothing could ever go wrong, like I said, in a dormitory, and nobody's ever going to be invited to a dormitory room for pre-gaming. Listen, your child, whoever your child is, should know that shouldn't happen in their room
Right.
because when you send those children out packing,
Yes.
hey, we're all good, let's go. And they get behind the wheel of a car and they get into a really bad accident and somebody's really badly injured. The liability associated with your child that was operating the pre-gaming party is sitting on your shoulders now. That becomes a liability exposure to the
Huh.
parent. I love the pre-gaming idea.
Do it somewhere
Just
else.
do it somewhere else. Yeah.
What happens if it is, let's say, this pre-gaming that you're talking about happens at a fraternity house? Who bears the responsibility there?
Oh,
Asking for a friend.
yeah, no, I'm thinking about all of those crazy litigation lawsuits that we saw with some of those fraternities and sororities over the years about overindulging, drinking, and some of those children unfortunately perished. They didn't. So they're going to be vicariously liable through and through. So everybody's going to be deposed. Everybody's going to be sworn to that lawsuit. Whoever was involved with that institution, I'm sure the fraternity itself will be also litigated
Huh.
against. I don't think there's any stopping the attorneys on those kinds of situations. There's just too much press about that's happened in the last several
Sure.
years. Yeah, look, parents are vicariously liable for their children wherever they are until they're no longer their children.
So that's
So,
forever.
that's not so much that, but again, when we kind of put that line in the sand of you got a job, yes, Oh my gosh, that's great. You're going to get an apartment? Oh, that's wonderful. And yeah, no, I don't want to be involved with signing on that apartment. It's all about you. When you start to separate and put that line in the sand for like when real
Mhm.
adulting starts to happen, that's when there's that separation. So there's a variety of very interesting questions that judges and attorneys will ask defendants in these kinds of situations, which is some basic rudimentary things. If you're asking your child, hey, listen, when was the last time you changed your oil? I don't know. My dad does that. When was the last time you put tires on your car? I have no idea. So the title might have been changed, but there's actually no relationship with that vehicle. It's time to get children focusing on what their responsibilities. We talked about at the beginning, at the onset, about high school kids getting their driver's licenses or permits. Everybody should have a parent teen driving agreement because the truth is the responsibility isn't only on the teen, it's
Right.
also on the parent.
So what kinds of
So
things would
when
be
when the
what kinds
dash
of things would
well,
be in this
yeah,
agreement?
great example of an agreement. So first of all, it's a Word document, so you can set it up and dictate it toward what makes sense for
Okay.
your family. So there's a variety of things that are listed. If it doesn't work out, delete it. But good example would be how many people are in the vehicle. This would be a responsibility on the driver. Driver's responsibility to have that vehicle garaged at a certain time in front of the house that we call that curfew hours for the car.
Mhm.
Now you want to go out, like have fun, but the curfew, and in certain states there's an
Yeah.
actual curfew, but the curfew should be okay, the vehicle should be back at this time. Or parent responsibility. Hey, listen, when there's a big red light on your dashboard, it's usually not a good thing that's blinking and yelling at you saying, pull over before your transmission blows up. You better tell your parents. So there's two sides to that street. So there's parents' responsibilities and really children's responsibilities. And of course, the child's responsible for walking around the car. Do you see? I don't know, maybe one tire has half the amount of tire pressure or air pressure in it. That's a dangerous situation. Somebody needs to bring that to somebody's attention immediately because there could be a small leak, could be ripe for a blowout on the highway. There could be a variety of things that can happen. So it's a wonderful document because look, parents don't take it as serious as they need
Right.
to because it is a privilege and it's a
Yes.
big responsibility. And the truth is, most of these kids are really good. I'm sure they are, and they have good grades, but the good grades, they don't translate in terms of 100 hours behind the wheel of the car. That doesn't work
Right.
that way.
Well,
Takes a lot
that's
of
Right.
experience.
right. That's what I was just going to say. So many things in life you learn from the experience. And when you're just starting out, you have zero experience.
Absolutely spot on. Zero experience. Look, I don't want to. Parents sometimes take this the wrong way, and it's like, hey, look, my kid's really good, and they know it all, and they're really
Doesn't matter.
smart, and yeah,
No.
it doesn't matter. Look, you could be driving in a city that you got to have a head on a swivel.
Yeah.
Even with the 14 cameras and 12
Mhm.
airbags, right? You got to have your head on a swivel. And it starts with defensive driving. So it starts with that training. That's why you got to move that needle back all the way to the point where how can we start to drip our kids with some information? It may not be behind the wheel, but reading literature, something to get their headspace in line with this is a really big privilege and this is a really big responsibility and I have to take this serious. And most kids unfortunately are not quite yet there for those
Right.
kinds of
And I think the
responsibilities.
sooner that we can start showing them how to care for their car, right? Like, obviously, they're responsible for filling up the gas, but the windshield wiper fluid and oil changes, where do you go? Service appointments, how do you make those? Take that, right? Because back to your litigation or being sued, and someone's asking if you're really adulting and responsible
Yep.
for your car, if we've worked along the way to help or teach our children to be responsible for their vehicle, right? When they really are the adult, that should be easy for them to say, yes, I know how to take it for service.
Yeah.
I go
S-
here,
Spot
all
on.
those things.
Well, because Carrie, think about what's happening. You have an attorney that's trying to do their best to exhaust the limits of liability that are associated with just not the
The
child,
parents.
but now if they can pierce the liability
Right.
of the parents, I can't wait. So they're going to do everything in their power to figure out, is there truly the parents still working and managing the children's
Right.
affairs, right? But if the case is it's not, then they can't pierce that. And there's no court that's going to say you just have to because you're the parent. That's not the case, right?
Right.
Sooner or later, they got to fly the coop. Preparing that's a great point. Preparing them in advance and saying, hey, look, here's what we do. It's every 10,000 miles we get that oil change, right? And at the same time, we're going to rotate the tires and all that good stuff and fill up the windshield washer dispenser. List
Yeah.
goes on and on.
Just find it so interesting that 18 seems like such an arbitrary number. They go to college and you need a power of attorney to document that you can listen in on a doctor's conversation for their medical treatment, but if they're going to be sued, you can be sued. I mean, it just doesn't seem
Doesn't
fair.
doesn't
It
make
doesn't seem
sense,
like
right?
it's balanced. No, either they are an adult and responsible for everything on their own, or they're not.
Yeah. I guess it's our HIPAA folks, right? HIPAA decided
Right.
that at age 18, that's it. That's what you got to deal with and figure it out. And then on the flip side, it's the courts. And again, that's civil. That's civil. Trying to figure out how they can get. You guys probably have driven by a few billboards that said, we got 1.3 million, we got
Yeah.
20
Yeah.
million. I was just in Tampa yesterday, and they said we the Morgan folks
Yeah.
20 million. Right? Like, look, I can assure you, I've seen countless claims in easily 7 to 8 figures throughout my course of time in the space. And oftentimes we'll see when there's a child involved, and it's usually the child being granted permission to operate the vehicle, or they had their own vehicle, and they just don't know exactly everything they need to know about operating a really quite responsible, heavy piece of machinery.
Yeah.
That's the big
Yeah.
challenge. I would implore all parents to think about ways to help minimize their exposure to kids behind the wheel of the car, rather than being so focused in on, I'm going to pay a premium. Look, here's a surprise. You're going to pay the premium. Okay. So if anybody was like, hey, how do I get out of this premium thing? You're not getting out of it. If you want your child to drive a car, otherwise you'll have no coverage, right? You're
Right.
going to pay the premium. So get over that part. Now it's, how do I avoid a 4-figure premium payment, right, for operating a vehicle, as opposed to a 7 or 8-figure out-of-pocket expense because of a massive lawsuit? I don't want to be a part of
Right.
that.
Right.
Right.
You gave us a lot
Yeah.
to think about today. That is for sure. A lot of great information for our listeners. Barry, we really appreciate you being on and talking with
Yeah.
us today.
You're welcome. My
If
pleasure.
It
Hopefully it
was
was
super
helpful.
helpful. If anyone would like to reach out to Barry directly for more information, he's reachable via email at barry.sokoloff@usi.com. And you can also reach out to us at info@parentcoachesunleashed.com, on Instagram as well. And we could provide a link to Barry. And any questions, any follow up questions you might have, we'd love to hear them so we could provide the information our listeners are looking for. So thank you, Barry. We appreciate your time today. This was super, super helpful.
You're
Yes,
very
super
welcome.
informative.
All
Thank you.
right.
You're very welcome.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
day.
gang.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica. Together, we can raise the next generation of independent, capable, and compassionate young adults.
We encourage you to send us an email with questions and feedback to info@parentcoachesunleashed.com. Please remember, you are not alone on this parenting journey.